Our next speaker will be Yitzhak Santis. Yitzhak is a Chief Programs Officer for NGO Monitor and Director of its newest project called BDS in the Pews. Yitzhak is an expert in the area of BDS and delegitimization within mainline churches, and he is the author of the report BDS in the Pews, European, US, and Canadian government funding behind anti-Israel activism in mainline churches. And some of you may have received that report. Prior to making Aliyah in January 2011, he spent 21 years as Middle East Affairs Director at the San Francisco Jewish Community Relations Council. In that capacity, he gained much experience countering Sabeel and other anti-Israel groups in the Bay Area, and also engaging in Christian-Jewish dialogue. Yitzhak will speak on prolonging conflict, Western government funding of anti-Israel activism in the churches. And I'm going to ask you all to hold your questions for Dexter until all the speakers complete their presentations. Yitzhak,
Thank you. I'd like to thank Alan and thank Petra for organizing this very important symposium and exchange of ideas here. I'd like to ask Rivka, could you please do me a favor and go outside and grab a copy of the report? Might have to, I forgot to bring it in. One of the things we're going to be doing, I'm going to be doing a, here we go. You can see it? Good. This will be a PowerPoint, and my goal here is to demonstrate that a lot of the funding coming to this organization, the Christ at Checkpoint, the organizations that sponsor it, and numerous other organizations that are in the same, thank you, that are in the same universe as the Holy Land Trust and Christ at the Checkpoint, that a lot of the money comes from a very surprising source, and that is Western democratic governments, mostly in Europe, but even from the United States. And it's a troubling thing to see. It was very heartwarming in December when Pope Francis came out with this statement. This is part of his much larger document, Evangelii Gaudium. We hold the Jewish people in special regard because their covenant with God has never been revoked. With them we believe in the one God who acts in history, and with him we accept the revealed word. And this really speaks of a very mature ongoing relationship between Christians and Jews, in this case the Catholic Church, but this is also emblematic of a dialogue and a relationship with many Protestant churches, mainline and evangelical as well. And this is an example of interfaith relations of mutual respect that I think is more conducive to building peace and you know, in a positive atmosphere between faiths. It hasn't always been that way, of course, and some of you might be familiar with these statues that grace the Strasbourg Cathedral, but are also in many other cathedrals in Europe. The statue of Ecclesia standing next to Synagoga, and this is what this was, is a very graphic way of demonstrating the triumphalism of the church over the synagogue, with Ecclesia holding her staff, holding the cross, and wearing a crown, and Synagoga, her spear is broken, her head is bowed, and she is blindfolded like a captive, or she's blind to the truth. And this was very common, of course, in the theology, Christian theology of the Middle Ages, and right up until the 20th century. And unfortunately, we have seen here at Christ at the Checkpoint very much the old spirit of which these statues represent. Reverend Stephen Sizer, was he speaking this year? No. No. Okay.
He's there though.
He is there. I thought I saw his picture, on his Facebook page. Yes. He said that Jews who reject Jesus Christ are outside the covenant of grace. It's very much 180 degrees from what Pope Francis said. Or that Gary Burge, who spoke at the 2012 Christ at the Check Post. And this one too. He said God is continuing to have a program with the Jewish people who Paul describes as enemies of the gospel. Very strong word, the word enemies. And this year, I wasn't there, but I was checking the Twitter feeds from Christ at the Checkpoint. We saw this conversation where Dan Juster from Tikkun Ministries, a Messianic Jewish group, spoke about how, in terms of Jewish, he said that, I'm just going to read it out loud. No, it's not license for Jewish people to do whatever they want. We must fall on faces and pray God turn them to Christ. And Dexter, I think you alluded to that. Then there's a conversation with Gary Burge and Juster. Gary Burge asked a question: can one honor Judaism without endorsing Israeli state with its policies? And Juster says yes, but the state preludes Jewish fulfillment. Once again, this exactly what Dexter was talking about. It's a theology of the Jews are blind in rejecting or not accepting Jesus as Christ, and therefore maybe the state of Israel is here for the purpose of what? Eventually leading the Jews to Jesus. And that's a supersessionist theology. Now I want to get into, away from theology, I'll leave that to Dexter and Robert. I want to get into the whole area of the funding and actually the much larger scene. Is that readable? Good. I want to go back to 2001, to the World Conference Against Racism and Xenophobia in Durban, South Africa. There was a governmental conference. Some of you, maybe most of you, remember what happened there. And there was an NGO forum. It was a parallel forum that took place. And the language, I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'll let you do that, but just the key words, the language of their final declaration pertaining to Israel. Racist apartheid state. I'm just going to give you the key words. International community, complete and total isolation of Israel. South Africa, sanctions and embargoes, severing all links between Israel and all states in the international community. I want to compare that now to the BDS call from 2005, which Palestinized what happened at Durban. And you look at the keywords, and the similarities are striking. International civil society, broad boycotts, divestment, South Africa, apartheid, pressure your respective states, embargoes, and sanctions. And out of this has grown a very large network of non-governmental organizations that are promoting boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and using the language of apartheid and racism and ethnic cleansing and genocide. I'm sure you've heard all this, for the whole sole purpose of delegitimizing Israel and to paint a picture of an Israeli state that is so evil, equal to apartheid, equal to Nazi Germany. You hear that also. And what do you do with such systems? Those systems must be dismantled, if not destroyed. We call this the Durban strategy. And we look at NGOs, how they operate, what their message is, and see how they fit into this Durban strategy. And what we have noticed when it comes to a number of Christian organizations, churches, caucuses, or groups within various churches, that they are indeed employing the Durban strategy. The whole question of the BDS campaign. Here we go. There's a great deal of confusion among many people, well-intentioned people who just want to see peace between Israelis and Palestinians and peace in the Middle East. What they want to hear is that, well, boycotts or selective boycotts or targeted boycotts will really help push the Israelis to make all the concessions that are necessary to bring peace. Well, that's music to the ears of the BDS movement, which often tries to hide their full agenda, but many BDS activists are actually quite open about it. I'll just read you one, Ahmed Moore, who said very clearly that BDS does mean the end of the Jewish state. Ending the occupation doesn't mean anything if it doesn't mean upending the Jewish state itself. And you really can't get any clearer than that. And I could produce dozens of statements like this from a wide variety of BDS activists. The BDS movement is set as a primary goal to capture the churches. On their website, you find this statement. It's a strategy statement. Religious institutions are seen in many communities as embodying important moral and ethical principles. Not only will successful divestment campaigns in the churches financially weaken the occupation, but will raise both the public profile and legitimacy of the BDS campaign. If Palestinians in Ramallah are calling for BDS, well, that's expected. They're partisans, it's their cause. They're going to call for boycotts, divestment, sanctions, and whatever else against Israel. But if that same movement can capture the churches, capture the voices of the churches, and able to co-opt the churches, to carry their water, to amplify their voice, to carry their message, then they have a major achievement indeed. So how does this funding work? We estimate that from European governments alone, there are up to, and perhaps a bit more, than 100 million euros per year are funneled into non-governmental organizations that are active in the Arab-Israeli conflict and promote the Durban strategy. The magnitude of this funding is enormous. It's about $140 million, and we estimate it goes to about 80 plus Israeli and Palestinian NGOs, as well as organizations operating in Europe and elsewhere. And this is no small amount of change. There's a huge amount of money, and you can see, and you can see just by the daily the daily noise. I don't know what else to call it. The daily noise in the newspapers and on YouTube and wherever, that there's a tremendous amount of effort and money going into the NGO campaign against Israel. Now, church aid societies play a very important role in Europe particularly, but elsewhere also in North America. These are this is a list of the most active ones in Europe. And I'll show you in a minute how this system works. But basically, many European governments farm out their humanitarian aid to third-party organizations. And in Europe, that often means Christian aid societies, both Catholic and Protestant. And the money will be allocated to these organizations, to these Christian aid societies, and then they in turn will then allocate it to NGOs around the world covering a wide range of issues. They have Middle East desks. The Middle East desks are often staffed by activists who have a very strong anti-Israel agenda, and they are able to direct the funding to the NGOs that are active here in Jerusalem and in the West Bank and Israel in general, that are pushing the Durban strategy. This is a bit of a schematic that shows the interdependability of these organizations, the different clusters, if you will, and the way they interact with each other in a kind of matrix. The governments, they are the funders, but the governments are also the recipients of lobbying efforts. And of course, governments make policy. NGOs are the beneficiaries. In turn, the NGOs also lobby governments. And the NGOs will then turn around and partner with Palestinian NGOs, many of them being Christian Palestinian NGOs. The Palestinian Christian NGOs, Holy Land Trust, Christ at the Checkpoint, Sabil, and so forth, they provide theology, they provide activism, they provide opportunities for volunteerism, for young people in particular coming from the West and from in church activists. And they serve as a catalyst. And they interact and they're partnering with the churches and church aid societies who are also beneficiaries of the governments and in turn are also funders of various NGOs, and they in turn amplify the Palestinian voice, in particular the Palestinian Christian voice. And we see how they interact all one with another. And it's this matrix that's very powerful, that generates millions and millions of euros for the NGO cause on an annual basis. So Christ at the Checkpoint, there you go. Christ at the Checkpoint's purpose is to disrupt the strong evangelical support for Israel, to advance the Palestinian nationalist agenda within evangelical churches, as we heard from Dexter and we'll hear from Robert, and I'll let them go into greater detail in that regard. However, what I want to point out here, I want to demonstrate here the channels. As soon as this thing, there we go, how Christ at the Checkpoint gets its funding. First of all, Christ at the Checkpoint is the principal organizers of the Bethlehem Bible College and the Holy Land Trust. And the Awad family plays a very strong role in both of these institutions. Well, our research has shown, and we particularly chose the years either immediately leading up to the first Christ at the Checkpoint conference, and leading through from like 2009 to 2014. So we see that the British government gave £15,000 to the Holy Land Trust, 2010, 2011. The European Union gave almost 200,000 euros to the Holy Land Trust to produce a film on human rights. The United States government, through the National Endowment for Democracy, granted $232,000 plus from 2006 to 2012 to the Holy Land Trust. 2013, we noticed that there was no grant offered. There was also no grant offered in 2011, but there was one in 2012. And now we have to see if in the year 2014 there will be a restarting of the grant, or if indeed a report that we wrote and brought to Washington last May on U.S. government support for organizations such as this, if that has had an impact, we believe it has. We're hoping that'll have a lasting impact. The Dutch government, through the church aid society called Cord Aid, which is a Catholic organization. We know that they're sending euros to both Holy Land Trust and the Bethlehem Bible College. It's detailed in the report that's outside the door here. And we know because they talk about partnership, they talk about allocations, but what's missing and what is not very much non-transparent is how much. How much money? We don't know. Neither the government, nor Cord Aid, nor Holy Land Trust at Bethlehem Bible College are very open about how much money they're putting out. Kerk en Actie, a Dutch Protestant church aid society, has pledged to raise 25,000 euros that they would grant to Bethlehem Bible College for 2014. And by far the largest non-governmental supporter for Bethlehem Bible College is the Global Ministries of the United Methodist Church of the United States, which between 2009 and 2014 raised and granted about $130,000 for the Bethlehem Bible College, and we can see how this all goes. Holy Land Trust supports BDS. They signed a petition in May 2005 calling for the academic boycott of Israel, and also signed the Palestinian Civil Society call for BDS. Holy Land Trust is on board for BDS completely and is part of the Durban strategy. Sami Awad claims a non-violent philosophy, claims to promote non-violence, and he is billed as such, and when he speaks to audiences in the United States, that is how he's promoted. And yet he has, believes that populist struggle, the nonviolent populist struggle, is not a substitute for the armed struggle. He's on record as saying that, and we have the document. He has had contact with terrorist groups, working with Hamas, supposed, as he says, to create for nonviolent training for Hamas, and other militant groups as well. And this is on a audio tape that is on the website of a mega church, and
The Vineyard Church in
Vineyard
2009.
That's right. Thank you. And we have that audio recording. So the wool is being pulled over the eyes of many people. And this is just another example, just to expand it a little bit, how Sabeel has received funds from the Canadian government, from the Dutch government, from the Swedish government, from numerous churches as well. The DR Consortium, which is another group relatively new, which we need to be spending more time and put more focus on this organization. And as well as EAPI, the Ecumenical Accompaniment Program for Palestine and Israel, which is a run by and by the World Council of Churches, and the Norwegian government has given directly to the World Council of Churches, as well as a whole host of other church aid agencies and member churches, and which helps support the funding as well as the management of the EAPI program. And EAPI is also very problematic, very difficult issues with EAPI. What they claim to do is that they bring volunteers for 3 months to come to the West Bank. They go to Hebron and they go to Jerusalem, East Jerusalem. They go to to Bil'in and to Tulkarm and Kalkilia to supposedly protect Palestinians from Israeli violence. And so they accompany Palestinians as they go about their daily business, school children on the way to school and so forth. A few weeks ago, about a month or so ago, I had a chance to meet an EAPI volunteer from Great Britain. Came to our kibbutz for Shabbat. I'm not sure what the exact connections were. And somebody asked him what he was doing, and he said, well, I was in Kalkilia, and they put me up in this apartment. It had a terrible view, and they said, why did it have a terrible view? Well, it was right next to the wall. And then he said, and they were really apologetic about it. They were explaining to me how it was really the last apartment that was available in Kalkilia, and he happened to end up in that one place where he had the terrible view of the security barrier. And I wanted to sell him a bridge in Brooklyn. He bought it. I'm going to wrap this up and describe for you a bit how NGO Monitor works and what our goal is. The NGO engine, there we go. The NGO engine, just spinning away right there, it's fueled by dollars, euros, and pounds, okay? So let me wrap it up there. This report is available just outside the door, and it goes into greater detail regarding the funding and price at the check post, as well as an example of this whole system, this whole matrix that needs to be understood if we're going to conquer it. Thank you.